In this video, I'm going to be discussing the astronomy of the science fiction survival game Subnautica. This video has been requested numerous times since I started my channel, but I've always been hesitant to make it because this game is among my favorite video games of all time. I absolutely adore Subnautica, and I have logged over 700 hours playing it, and that's not even counting below zero. I love Planet 4546b and love spending time there. But, as you will see, the astronomy on display within the game could be better. So, before I begin, I want to provide the disclaimer that this video is intended for education and entertainment. It is not, by any means, a review or criticism of the game, or meant to disparage anyone from playing it. On the contrary, I highly recommend the game. With that said, let's get into it. I want to start off with the planet's name, 4546b. It's clear from this sequence of numbers, followed by the letter B, that its creators intended it to be a catalog name, reminiscent of known exoplanets such as Kepler 22b or LHS 1140b. And that was a really good idea. Catalog names are great at implying that a planet is distant and unexplored, which can create an air of mystery and foreboding. However, as you may have noticed from the examples I just gave of actual exoplanets, catalog names are made up of two parts, a survey identifier and an index number. This name has an index number, but is missing its survey identifier. Survey identifiers reference either the telescope used to map the star, a specific mapping mission, or sometimes the astronomer that mapped the star, and, most importantly, indicate which catalog they appear in under the following index number. Just having an index number for a star is like being given the page number of a book, but not given the book's title. Within Subnautica's fictional universe, humanity spans not only our own galaxy, but several nearby galaxies. Each of these galaxies have, on average, 400 billion stars. So listing the stars with only a sequence of numbers would get ridiculous and impractical really quickly. This would provide even more reason to have the stars divided up into different catalogs. Certainly one for each galaxy, but it would be an even better idea to have each galaxy divided up into multiple catalogs so that no one catalog gets too large to be useful. The developers of Subnautica could have used almost anything for the planet's survey identifier. A name or word chosen at random because it sounded cool, or one that was significant in some way. Maybe something from within the lore, an inside joke among the developers, or an Easter egg to be uncovered by their fans. Or they could have used an acronym or initialism, something like ALTER, standing for Altera Astronomical Research, or just UW, standing for Unknown Worlds, the name of their development company. Or they could have used any acronym or initialism they wanted and leave its meaning unspecified. Anything would have been better than just a 4-digit number. It was a good idea, but not quite executed correctly. Next, I want to talk about the amount of information we're given about the planet. Subnautica has the collection of scientific data as part of its game loop, requiring the player to scan various flora, fauna, fungi, minerals, and technology to populate an in-game database. So there's an established method within the game to provide technical information without boring or overwhelming the player with it. After the player character has scavenged enough resources to repair their life pod, it conducts an environmental scan and outputs the results to the PDA. This is where the game's developers could have offered information about the planet and helped paint a picture of the strange alien world the player is exploring. But instead, we are given 3 scraps of information that are ultimately redundant and useless. The first piece of information is that we are on a Category 3 ocean planet. At this point, the player has been playing the game for between several minutes and a couple of hours. They know they're in an ocean. And if they have followed the usual science fiction logic in which planets are defined by a single geological feature, then they have likely assumed that it was an ocean planet. Additionally, the Category 3 designation is meaningless. Modern science does not have categories for ocean planets. And while they clearly do within the fiction of Subnautica, we don't know what those categories mean, so this provides no real information. The second scrap of information they give is that the planet possesses a nitrogen-oxygen atmosphere. This is obviously meant to imply that the planet's atmosphere is breathable, but of course the player already knows this, since their character has been breathing the air this whole time. Furthermore, this is not sufficient information to indicate that an atmosphere is breathable. Yes, human life requires that nitrogen and oxygen be present in the atmosphere, but they must be within the proper ratio. If the nitrogen-oxygen ratio is too high or too low, then it's not breathable. Or, more accurately, it's not survivable. Also, the atmosphere needs to be within the proper pressure range. Too high or too low, and once again, it's a no-go. This is true of temperature as well. So as before, not useful. The third piece of information is that the planet possesses extensive biodiversity. If you've ever played or even seen the game, then you know how head-slappingly obvious this statement is. Not only does this PDA entry not give the player any information about the planet, it doesn't even give any real information about the local environment. So I'm not sure what purpose the developers of the game felt this database entry actually served. To me, it's just a disappointing missed opportunity. Now let's turn our gaze toward the sky of 4546b. One of the first things a player notices upon climbing out of their life pod is this giant freaking moon, which I'm going to label as S1. This moon is terrifyingly enormous, taking up approximately 43 degrees of the sky. This is about 83 times larger than Luna appears in Earth's sky. When a moon has an angular diameter this large, it means that it is either really big, orbits really close, or both. Since it is physically impossible for Luna to orbit close enough to Earth to have a comparable angular diameter, we can conclude that S1 is substantially larger than Luna. Based on artwork from the game and the view of S1 from orbit of 4546b, it appears very large and very close, suggesting that it may even be comparable in size to 4546b. If that's true, then the two objects would be better described as a double planet system. Though if this were the case, the planet's name is even more inaccurate, as it should end with either B1 or B2, depending on which one is the more massive planet. Also, if these were double planets, then they would both be tidally locked with one another. So S1 would remain fixed in the sky of 4546b, and only one of its hemispheres would be visible. But this is far from the case. In the original Subnautica game, S1 orbits 4546b with a period of approximately 7 hours and 13 minutes. However, in Below Zero, S1 has a period of approximately 10 hours and 15 minutes. I have no explanation for how this could be. The obvious conclusion is that in the time between games, S1 moved farther out in its orbit, but there is no physical means by which this could happen, and its angular diameter doesn't seem to have changed, so I'm just forced to log this as an indiscrepancy. As S1 orbits 4546b, it shows a different side depending on where it is in the sky. The only way this could happen is if S1 has a rotation rate of 0 relative to its orbit. This is virtually impossible due to the way planets form and the conservation of angular momentum. Additionally, the center of S1 sits at an elevation of approximately 35 degrees above the local horizon and maintains this elevation throughout its orbit. This is also impossible. The only way this could exist is if the player character was located directly on one of the planet's poles and S1 was in an equatorial orbit. However, even in that circumstance, S1 would sit much closer to the horizon. While there is evidence that the events of Subnautica do take place at a high latitude and relatively close to one of the planet's polar ice caps, the player character is definitely not directly on the pole. Therefore, S1 should dip below the horizon at some point during its orbit. I'm not sure why the game's developers chose to have S1 circle the sky rather than rise and set like everything we see in our sky. Maybe it was a limitation of the game engine. I'm not familiar enough with how Unity handles skyboxes to say for sure, or even if Unity uses skyboxes. Regardless, I feel that if they had gone the more realistic route and had 4546b and S1 tidally locked to one another, it would have been easier to code and more beneficial to the player. The developers wouldn't have had to worry about moving or rotating the moon in the sky, and it would have provided the player with an in-game natural clock, allowing them to determine the time of day based on the phase that S1 was in. But, whatever. About the only thing that is realistic about S1 is its coloration. That is a plausible color for a planetary body that has had the iron-containing minerals in its crust oxidize, possibly due to the presence of water on its surface in the distant past. Moving on, we come to the planet's second major moon, which I'm going to label as S2. Where is it, you might ask? Well, in this case, we have to wait until sunset in order to see it. This suggests that the moon's surface is so dark that what little sunlight it reflects is unable to be seen behind the glow of the daytime sky. How its surface can be that dark, I have no idea. Our moon is the color of asphalt, and even it reflects around 10% of the light hitting it, which is more than enough to make it visible during the day. S2 is apparently painted with anti-black or something. S2 is also quite large in the sky, having an angular diameter of approximately 15 degrees, which is 29 times larger than Earth's full moon. Once again, this suggests that it is likely large and/or close. Both have dire circumstances for the stability of the system. Multiple spherical moons around a terrestrial planet is already a highly unlikely prospect, but having them massive objects that orbit close to one another increases the unlikelihood exponentially. For whatever reason, the developers of the game chose to use a 2D sprite for the moon rather than a 3D object, so S2 does not go through phases during the night, remaining in a full phase regardless of the position of the sun. It also does not move in the sky, remaining at an elevation of approximately 75 degrees above the local horizon and a heading of 0 degrees due north. This implies that S2 and 4546b are tidally locked to one another and provides further evidence that the player character is located at a high latitude of the planet's southern hemisphere. Together, the moons of planet 4546b create a physically impossible scenario in which the planet rotates about its axis, tidally locked with its outermost moon, while its giant innermost moon circles one specific spot on the planet's surface, without itself rotating. I call S2 the outermost moon because in both Subnautica and Below Zero, S1 can be seen eclipsing S2 during its orbit. However, artwork from Below Zero's load screen depicts S2 passing in front of S1, so which moon is in what position remains canonically uncertain. The system star, simply called 4546, rises bearing approximately 38 degrees northeast of the player character's position, passes directly overhead, and sets at a bearing of 218 degrees southwest. This would only be possible if the player character were located on the equator and the planet was tilted on its axis by 38 degrees. However, if this were the case, the planet's 20-hour synodic rotation period would be split in half, with 10 hours of daylight and 10 hours of night. But it isn't. Daylight on 4546b lasts for 15 hours, with night only lasting 5. This is only possible if the player character is located at a high latitude. But if this were true, the sun would follow a very different path, rising in the northeast, making a large circle of the sky, and then setting in the northwest. And because of how short a time the sun would spend beneath the horizon, it is unlikely that the northern sky would ever be completely dark. The final issue with the sky of 4546b is that its stars do not move, neither rising and setting like the sun, nor rotating around the player character like the clouds. The only way this could be possible is if the planet itself isn't rotating, but then the sun wouldn't rise either. Clearly, this was a design decision made by the game's developers, either due to difficulties implementing moving stars or a belief that a moving night sky might be disorienting to the players. Subnautica is definitely not the only game to do this, but on top of all the other scientific inaccuracies present, it's not helping. But I don't want to leave you thinking that nothing about the game's world is realistic. Ocean planets do exist and can support life, potentially even human life. I've talked with oceanographers that tell me that much of the game's underwater geology is surprisingly accurate, except for the lava zone. That's not how lava behaves underwater. But the areas of deep oceans on the planet being mostly devoid of life is very accurate. If a planet's oceans are too deep, this can prevent the rocks of the seafloor from being eroded, keeping their mineral nutrients sequestered beyond the reach of most life forms, and leaving the few spots on the planet where volcanoes build up to near or above the ocean surface the only habitats where life can get a foothold and thrive. Thank you for joining me in my analysis of the Astronomy of Subnautica. Let me know in the comments how furious you are at me for besmirching the name of this awesome game, and let me know what your fondest memory of playing the game is. Tell me, what's your favorite biome? Which Leviathan class creature do you dread encountering the most? What have you named the Reaper Leviathan that stalks your nightmares? Mine's named Derek. By the time you're watching this, Subnautica 2 will have released into early access, so you may not hear from me for a while. But I'll have to come up for air eventually, and I'm sure I'll have even more pedantic musings to share. I hope to see you then.